Before we get into the full picture, here's a question for you. Are you worried about how interest rates, inflation, or economic changes might affect your Social Security or retirement income? If so, this video is for you. A major decision is approaching on July 30th, when the Federal Reserve meets to decide whether to cut interest rates. Many seniors and fixed-income Americans are unsure how this will affect their day-to-day lives, from grocery bills to housing costs. Today, we're going to break down the situation in simple terms, highlight what the experts are predicting, and explain what this could mean for your financial future. So stay with me through the end of this video, because I'll explain how upcoming events, especially tariffs and political decisions, could shape the rest of 2025. And if you're new here or returning, please subscribe to Social Security Post and click the like button so we can continue helping seniors, retirees, and all Americans stay informed about Social Security, Medicaid, SNAP, and economic changes. The date July 30th may sound like any other Tuesday, but for millions of Americans, especially seniors and Social Security recipients, it's much more than that. That's the day the Federal Reserve will decide whether or not to cut interest rates, which affects everything from the cost of groceries to how much interest you earn on your savings. If the Fed cuts rates, inflation could rise, putting more pressure on household budgets. On the other hand, holding rates steady could mean higher borrowing costs, but better price stability in the short term. These decisions don't just impact Wall Street, they hit home for people relying on fixed incomes. Even if you're not following the stock market, rate cuts can influence everything from Medicare premiums to rent increases. It's essential that everyday Americans, especially those on limited incomes, understand what's coming and how to prepare. That's exactly why we're breaking it all down today, without the confusing financial jargon. The Federal Reserve, often simply called the Fed, has two key responsibilities. These are known as their dual mandate: maximum employment and price stability. In plain terms, this means they aim to keep as many people working as possible while making sure inflation doesn't spiral out of control. To do this, they adjust interest rates, raising them to cool down rising prices, or cutting them to boost the economy during downturns. For Social Security recipients, this balancing act is crucial. If inflation rises too fast, your fixed income loses value because your dollar doesn't stretch as far. But if the job market crashes, the economy could fall into a recession, threatening federal revenues and future benefit adjustments. That's why the Fed is under pressure to carefully weigh both sides before making changes to interest rates, especially with an uncertain economy and political landscape ahead. The June jobs report, which came out in early July, sent a strong message to policymakers and economists alike. The labor market is doing well. The U.S. economy added 147,000 new jobs, far exceeding the projected 118,000. Even more impressive, the unemployment rate fell to 4.1%, showing that the job market remains strong and steady. This matters because one of the Fed's top concerns, protecting employment, doesn't seem to be an urgent issue right now. When jobs are plentiful and unemployment is low, there's less pressure for the Fed to take action like cutting interest rates to stimulate the economy. And since they're seeing solid growth in employment, it actually gives them more reason to wait. Seniors might think a rate cut would help, but in this case, the strong job numbers are a signal that the economy doesn't need that kind of support just yet, at least from the Fed's perspective. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell recently made it clear he's holding off on interest rate cuts for now, largely due to uncertainty around tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods, and when these go up, prices often rise for consumers. Powell emphasized that this kind of tariff inflation makes it difficult to lower interest rates without worsening the situation. Simply put, when there's too much unpredictability, the Fed prefers to wait and see. For seniors and retirees, this hesitation can feel frustrating, especially if you're hoping for some relief in loan rates or investment returns. But Powell's concern is that cutting rates too soon could backfire by stoking inflation further, making things like groceries, medicine, and rent even more expensive. His wait-and-watch approach is based on trying to prevent that scenario, even if it means holding rates steady a bit longer. If you've noticed that prices on everyday goods are rising again, tariffs may be a big reason why. According to the latest Consumer Price Index (CPI) data, inflation rose from 2.4% in May to 2.7% in June, a noticeable jump. Retailers aren't passing all of those costs to consumers at once. but they're slowly raising prices to avoid shocking buyers. This gradual increase still eats into your budget, especially if you're living on Social Security or disability income. What this means for the Federal Reserve is significant. With inflation already trending upward, largely due to rising tariffs, lowering interest rates could make things even worse. That's why the Fed is choosing caution. If inflation continues to rise, particularly in goods and essentials, it would hurt seniors most, those who can least afford higher costs. Powell's comments confirmed this fear. Without the tariffs, rate cuts might have started already. There are two major reasons the Federal Reserve is holding off on cutting interest rates. The labor market is still healthy, and inflation is once again climbing. Both of these conditions go against what typically prompts a rate cut. If the economy were slowing and prices were steady or falling, the Fed might act. But with job growth and inflation both present, they're stuck in a holding pattern. From your point of view, as someone on a fixed or limited income, this pause means no immediate relief on borrowing costs or savings interest. However, it also means the Fed is trying to avoid creating more pain by letting prices spiral out of control. Their goal is stability, not sudden changes that could rattle the economy. For now, that means sticking to their current rate policy. President Donald Trump has made it no secret that he wants interest rates lowered, and fast. He's even attempted to remove Jerome Powell from his position as Fed chair, but legally, that's nearly impossible. The Supreme Court ruled that a sitting president cannot fire the Fed chair without legitimate cause, and so far, none of Trump's attempts, like blaming Powell for $600 million in budget overruns, have succeeded. But now Powell remains in control of monetary policy, and he's resisting Trump's pressure to cut rates. This political standoff matters because it shows that even high-level influence can't quickly change the course of economic policy. Seniors should take comfort in knowing that decisions are still being made based on economic indicators, not just politics. But looking ahead to 2026, when Powell's term ends, expect changes if Trump gets to appoint a new Fed chair. After July 30th, the next Federal Reserve meeting will take place on September 17th. Right now, there's a 39.3% chance they won't cut rates by then either. That number may seem low, but it reflects the ongoing uncertainty surrounding tariffs and inflation. The Fed is in no rush. They want to see real results and trends before making any moves. That's why Powell continues to stress a wait-and-see approach. The key issue they're watching is how tariffs continue to influence inflation. If the impact is temporary and price stability returns, then a September cut becomes more likely. But if inflation continues rising, especially for essentials like food and fuel, the Fed will likely hold off again. So, seniors hoping for rate relief may have to wait a bit longer and plan accordingly. Here's what's interesting. If Jerome Powell continues to hold back on cutting interest rates, it sets the stage for a more aggressive strategy later, especially if Trump returns and appoints a new chair in May 2026. That chair may want to cut rates quickly and deeply to make up for lost time, which could shake up markets and impact the broader economy, including your retirement accounts and benefit purchasing power. Lower interest rates in the future could be good for investments like stocks and even real estate, but bad for those depending on interest income or trying to keep up with inflation. So while the delay might seem frustrating now, it could result in dramatic changes later. Seniors should be watching carefully and preparing for both possibilities: a delayed rate cut now or a sharper change once new leadership steps in. There are two critical events coming up that could completely change the Federal Reserve's current thinking. First is the FOMC press conference after the July meeting. Everyone will be listening closely to Powell's words for any hint of what might happen next. If he signals growing concern over inflation or mentions easing tensions around tariffs, it could swing expectations for a cut in September. And the second major moment will come in mid-August, when more data on tariff impacts will become available. If reports show inflation cooling, pressure may return for the Fed to act. But if tariffs continue to fuel price increases, rate cuts will likely be off the table again. That's why it's so important to stay informed. We'll be keeping you updated on both of these events as they unfold. So to wrap this up, no rate cut is expected on July 30th, and the Federal Reserve is choosing caution as inflation rises and the labor market remains strong. Whether you rely on Social Security, SSI, SSDI, or are just watching your budget closely, understanding these economic decisions helps you plan smarter. The good news is, you're not alone. We're here to break it all down for you. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to Social Security Post so you never miss an update. And let me know in the comments, do you think the Fed should cut rates soon, or should they wait until inflation settles? I'll be replying to your questions in the comments. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and take care.